Hello everyone. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at how we can utilize blueprints inside of Unreal Engine so that you'll be able to create more sophisticated materials that allow you to make minor and major adjustments to your texture maps without needing to go back into your texture authoring software. I'll show you how we can set up a material node graph to make subtle adjustments like tweaking contrast of your roughness map, and how we can make more noticeable, more substantial adjustments like swapping out a complete color from your diffuse map. We'll do all this through blueprints in Unreal Engine. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and look at our material and also talk a little bit about why we want to create a blueprint node graph inside Unreal Engine. So I'm opening my material. This should look familiar. This is the basic workflow when we're setting up a material in Unreal Engine. So we have our base color, our packed map. So this contains our metalness, roughness, and ambient occlusion. We have our emissive map, and we have our normal map. Should be familiar. So the reason why we want to add complexity to this material is so we can have more control to make fine adjustments and large form adjustments. A couple reasons why we want to do this. When we bring our asset into like unique lighting scenarios, sometimes the material doesn't pop as much as it does like in our texture authoring software. Lighting conditions change, so you might need to make subtle adjustments on a shot per shot basis. That's more for like still image rendering and cinematics. But even in games, right, we want to, a lot of times assets or characters or whatever will be able to be tweaked and customized by the player. So if, for example, we have an asset and it changes colors, we're not going to render out each color from Substance Painter or Quixel Mixer, right? We're going to set up some functionality in our material so that the player would be able to swap those colors, right? And so that's basically what we're going to do today. And I'll show you cool different nodes that we can utilize. And hopefully this is like my material that I'm going to create, but I just want to open the door for you to start exploring how you can add intricacies to your materials. And obviously it's going to be dependent on what you're trying to achieve as your output. There's a lot of things that we can do here. The possibilities are virtually endless. So don't think this is like the only way to go about doing this stuff. I'm just here to basically introduce you to these concepts and hopefully open the door and let you see like, oh, I could do like a lot of cool things with like this node and this workflow, right? So yeah, that's just a brief, quick explanation of what we're going to do and why we're going to do it and our basic material. To make things a little bit easier on myself, I'm going to switch my viewport, my material viewport, so it's my actual asset instead of the sphere. So let's open our content browser, navigate to that asset, and then I can hit this icon right here, and that sets it to the model for my asset, which is a lot easier to look at. So once we have this, let's just go ahead and make it bigger. There we go. So once we have this, now we can start diving into our material. All right, so let's look at our emissive spot first. So the first thing I want to do is I want to control the intensity of the emissive channel. I'll also eventually control the color of it as well. Pretty simple node setup. So if you're new to Unreal Blueprints, we can get our multiply node a couple different ways. My way is holding M on the keyboard and left clicking. Because this is a node we use a lot, that's just the quickest. But you can also right click, type in multiply, and you can get the node that way as well. So let's go ahead and delete that. And let's plug our multiply output into emissive. And let's plug our RGB, so our emissive map, into A. So right now it's multiplying by 1. We shouldn't see a change. But as soon as we crank this up, we'll go something ridiculous like 600. Bam! We got really intense light because we're multiplying it. We're beefing up the intensity, essentially. So what I want to do is later down the line, in the near future, I want to be able to control this parameter outside of our material. Oops, I can't have a null value. I have to enter 1. So I want to be able to control control that outside of the material blueprint. So if you're like on a team and you don't want somebody, let's say you're the tech artist, you don't want anybody to mess with the blueprint itself, we want to expose this parameter eventually. But for right now, I'll just make a constant node. So if you hold 1 on the keyboard, right click, that brings up your constant, or you can right click, type in constant, right? I'll plug this in. And all this is doing is like, I now have this and I'll be able to control it later on. So let's do 600 so you can see it's doing the same thing, but I want it to be 1 for now. And we want to get a Constant3Vector parameter. So that's essentially our color node, and that's going to drive the color change. So I'll get a multiply node again. Hold M, left click, plug in your map, and then plug the output into multiply. So I'm making like this chain. And then for B, we're going to get a constant 3-vector. So if you type in constant, you can see it there. I typically type in 3-vector. That's usually how I get it. But if you hold V, that's like another way to get it as well. Hold V and left click. So now in my I'll just call it, I call this a color node, but it's technically a Constant3Vector node. But in my color node, I'm going to tweak the values. And you should see it start changing color. Crank that saturation all the way up. And you can see it change. Okay, so I'm just going to set this to white for now, so it's not really doing anything. Actually, no, let's set this to a different color. Pretty vibrant. Let's crank up the intensity too. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is save, and then we'll see these changes on our object. So every time I want to make a change, I'll have to come back here, tweak the value to like, let's go back to 1, right? And let's take this back to basically white. I'll hit save, and that will show me the update. So what I want to do, though, is I want to be able to see that change on the fly, as well as I want to be able to expose these as parameters so that somebody outside of this node network can access it. And so let's go ahead and do that. So save, update it. Let's go back to our content drawer. Let's push this to the side for now. And here's my material. What I'm going to do is right click, create a material instance, okay? So typically what we do is we have our master material and then an instance or several instances, because the master material houses that blueprint, so changes we make in the blueprint will propagate through the instances, right? But changes that we make in the instances won't propagate into the master material. Instances are also good for if you have multiple of the same model, but you need like different colors, for example. You can have multiple material instances and drive the change in the instances. So this is what the material instance looks like. We don't have the shader network because it's pulling it all from the main one. But in our instance, we have these parameters that we can easily control. Right now, we don't have too many, though, because we didn't set any up. So what I'm going to do is, in my master material, you have to do a little prep work to set up the parameters to be exposed for the material instance. So to do that, I'm going to select my constant node, right-click, convert to parameter. So this is a scalar parameter, and now we can access it outside of the blueprint. If you hold S and click on your keyboard, that saves you a step if you know you're going to make it a parameter anyway. So that's helpful too as well. Same thing here. We want to convert this to a parameter. And now that's exposed. So actually, when I hold V on the keyboard and click, it's a parameter, Constant3Vector. So I'm just going to save it. And then let's go back to our material instance. Now you can see we have this param and this param. And if I tweak this one, this is controlling the intensity. If I select this one, I just focus on changing the hue. That's going to control our color. And notice how it's not updating here, right? So I'll say, I don't even have to save this. I don't think. It's not updating here, right? Because we have to assign that material instance material to our object. Obviously, that's way too bright. It's messing with our flare and bloom. So we'll take that down. But you can see I'm making these adjustments on the fly, right? I don't have to necessarily save it out. Now you have to save it before you close it, obviously. So let's go ahead and save. You can always reset the settings to that default. So what I like to do is I like to keep the settings as close to like when I just plug in the maps, and then I tweak the parameters, and that will give me my punch ups and stuff. So that's using the parameter nodes. That's kind of looking at the instance shader as well, and those two things are going to be super important moving forward. One last thing I do want to show in the parameters, though, is in our instance, you can see how it's not named correctly, right? So let's look at how we can name these parameters and be more organized. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to call this one color. And this one I'm going to call intensity. So I'm going to keep it simple. Technically, there are things we can do, like if you only want to adjust like the hue, because technically when we adjust the value and saturation, it's or the value specifically, it's adjusting the intensity too, right? But we're not going to dive too that deep just yet. So there's the parameter names. So if I save this, I should see it updated. You can see intensity color. We want to organize it. So what we can do is we have these groups. Oops, click on the thing. So group none. So I'll call this one emissive. We'll look at order later when we get some more, but that's the order of the group. And then in the intensity node, I will select that emissive one I made. Save. Come back here. And I have emissive color and emissive intensity. Okay? So I think we want to look at the normal map next. That's pretty easy, just a couple of nodes. So what we're going to do is grab a FlattenNormal node. So I'll just start and type in flatten normal. Plug that into the normal channel in our material. Grab our normal map, put it in here. And let's grab a constant, but I know I'm going to want to convert this to a parameter anyway, so I'm going to use a scalar parameter. Again, for our purposes, it's like kind of the same thing. The scalar parameter is just exposed in our material instance. So I'll hold S, tap, and we'll call this one normal intensity. And we'll plug this in. So what FlattenNormals does is a little bit weird. Basically, it's flattening the normals, right? So you're going to have nothing. So we want a value of 0, so it's not doing anything to the normal as our default. Let's go ahead and put this in our a new group. We'll call it normal. And we want it to be underneath our emissive, maybe. So that's where this comes into handy. So the sort priority. So I can set it to 33. Let's go ahead and save. And then in our material instance, we should see that normal. So let's enable it. We'll zoom in to see what it's doing. Let's go to the brighter side. Right here. And so when we start playing with that, you can see it's like inverting it because I'm going above the 0, which is flat. And if I do -1, that direction is increasing our normals. You can actually kind of see it better here. So if we play with this value, I think 1 should be completely flat, to be honest. And 0 should be your normal intensity, the regular intensity on your normal map. And then anything under 1 is going to push your normals in that direction that they originally painted. So that's how that works. Pretty simple. I really don't tweak the normals that much. So even though we are doing like these adjustments, sometimes there's things that you do want to do in your texture authoring software that you might not necessarily want to do in Engine. But like for a quick thing, maybe you're like zoomed out and you just need to crank up the intensity or something so it reads better. That could be useful. So let's revert this back to 0, and that's the normal map. Alright, so now I want to look at the roughness map, and I want to be able to control the contrast of that. And remember, roughness is just a grayscale map. And that's the G channel. Okay. So, basically, I want to show 3 different nodes that we can use to control contrast. They each do it in a little bit of a different way. So let's go ahead and do that. First, I'm going to start with CheapContrast, which is the least expensive out of these. And let's just break that node. So to break a node connection, you can hold Alt on the keyboard. That breaks the node connection. So we'll use CheapContrast. And we can plug this into our roughness. And we'll get a scalar parameter, so hold S. And I will call this one CheapContrast value. Plug it in. And so CheapContrast kind of works like a very limited version of Photoshop's levels adjustment layer. It's basically like if you think about Photoshop the levels adjustments, you're kind of pulling the black and white values in. So I'll show you a couple other ways that we can control contrast. Let's go ahead and see what this does. So I'm going to also, let's make a roughness. So default value, I think, yeah, for this one we want to keep it to 0. That's the default that we need. And we'll set the sort priority. So we'll do 31, since that's going to be above our emissive. And we'll make a new group called roughness. and save. And we'll go to our instance. So now we have this cheap roughness, and we can see what it's doing a bit better. So you can see it's playing with that contrast. So I'm boosting it up, taking it down. So this is just one way. And I am going to use this like very small increments, like 0.05, maybe 0.5. You know, I'll just be very subtle with it. And it's a very, when I'm tweaking the roughness, it's like very dependent on my lighting. And it's like, is this giving me the look I'm going for? But yeah. So that's one method, cheap contrast. So let's go back to our blueprint and let's look at SCurves. And we'll plug that in. Drag out a scalar, so I'll hold S, left click. I'll call this one SCurve value. So the SCurve, it's similar to the curves adjustment layer in Photoshop. And basically what it's doing is like in Photoshop, that adjustment layer has like, it's linear, right, from blacks to your whites, and then having a subtle S curve like boosts the contrast it gets in the between the darker values and lighter values. I'll plug that in. So we want this to be default value of 1. Something else we can do is we could limit these values. So you can say, hey, don't go beyond like -2 and 2. But we don't really need to do that. So let me just put this in our roughness category, and I shouldn't need to play with the sort order. Save. Boom. So I have that SCurve value. And so we can see what that does. Let's reset this one. And you can see what it's doing. Just playing with the contrast of our roughness map. When you take it like below 1, it's going the opposite direction. It's like flattening it. Okay. So again, I'm just very subtle when I make roughness adjustments. And the last one I want to show, I wouldn't necessarily put all 3 of these on. I would probably pick one. But maybe you can fine tune it, Creator, by having all 3 on. So lastly, I want to use a 3-point levels. Let's right click 3-point levels. So this is just going to be more like the levels adjustment layer in Photoshop, and it's going to give you way more control than CheapContrast because you're going to be able to dictate what the new black value is, the new middle gray, and the new white value. So I need scalar parameters for all. Again, our roughness. All 3 of these. So I'll hit S click, S click, S click. So this one will be our black one, our middle gray, and our white. So here we need to make sure, you can see this was changing. We need to make sure we set up our default values correctly. So for black, that should be 0. Middle gray should be 0.5. And our white should be 1. And let's name these. Black value. Mid value. and white value. Okay, save. Go to our instance. Let's reset the CheapContrast. Oops, those are not the default values, so it's got switched to 1. This should be 0.5. Save. There we go. And I didn't put them in the group, so I'll fix that after the word. So you can see here, we just can we have way more finer control over our contrast. Okay. So I just wanted to show you guys those 3 methods. Let's go ahead and put these in the right group. So let's make a new group, call it Roughness. We'll call it 3 point. So we'll do black first. So we'll do 1, middle, roughness 3.2, and oops, white value 3, roughness 3 point. Save, check it, and that looks clean. So really, if I'm tweaking the roughness, I'm personally going to rely more on the 3 point versus the cheap and SCurve. But that's up to you. What works for you. So that's the roughness. And before we move on to the diffuse, let's actually go ahead and clean up our blueprints. All I need to do is select these nodes that are associated with the normal map. I hit C, type in normal map, and this is how I can start grouping these and moving them together. So let's go ahead and select the nodes associated with the emissive, hit C, call this emissive, move that. Our roughness nodes, C, roughness, and now we're getting to a good spot. So if this is annoying to you too, we can click on a connection line. And what that does is it gives us these little nodules. This is also good to like split them. So if you're using like one of these for multiple inputs, you can drag it out and do that. Just double clicking. And so hopefully you can see how this looks a little bit cleaner. It's kind of easier to follow the node setup. So yeah, that's how you can like pretty quickly organize things. And I'll just continue to organize as we add more complexity to our graph. So looking at the base color, the diffuse, what I want to do is just play with the color. So you can like subtly tweak the color, maybe the color's off depending on the lighting solution, right? And I'll go over this pretty quickly. I'm going to get a desaturation node. I'm going to get a multiply. And I'm going to get something called a power node. It's basically like a power of. So if you have a value of, let's say, 2 in here, and then the exponent you have a value of 3, it's going to multiply 2 3 times. So when we plug in a map into the power node, it's basically going to essentially hold our white values, and then when we multiply like darker values, they get darker. So you'll see what happens there. And then I'll just grab a multiply node, another one. So M, right click, multiply. Okay. So I'm going to get a scalar parameter. I'll hold S, click. We'll call this one Desaturation. Plug this in. This one we will get, and I should be plugging these into each other. I need another scalar. We'll call this one base color. We'll call this one contrast. Oops, sorry. I'll pull it out. It's just a scalar parameter. But we'll call it contrast. This is like another way you can kind of play with contrast with the power node. Multiply, and we'll pull out a color vector 3 constant. So Constant3Vector, and we actually want it to be a parameter, so we can adjust it. We'll call it color shift. And then all this needs to go into the base color. Okay, so obviously you can see it changed our look. Let's fix that. So for desaturation, we want that to be 0. For base color, we want it to be 1. For contrast, we're using the power node, so this time it has to be 1. And for the default hue shift, we need it to be 0 in value. Okay, and so if we plug our base node back in, just the raw base node texture, we shouldn't see, any changes. So this is like our default settings that we want. Okay, let's go ahead and put these new parameters we created in a group. We'll call this one like base color. I think we want this to be 1. And base color. Base color 1. And 1. I might have already used 1, so we'll see. Okay, so let's go ahead and save it. Let's comment this out too. And save. So yeah, now we have these base colors. So if I hit base color, I should have called this intensity. I don't know why I called it base color. It's like the brightness. So let's just correct that right now. I think I wanted to call it base color brightness, but there we go. So we have our brightness. We have our color shift. So if I play with the hue, nothing happens because we gotta give it some saturation. Okay. So right now this is a pretty aggressive color shift, right? It's like the whole thing. So this might not be too helpful for us right now, but I'm going to show you a color shift that's going to make more sense. But yeah, that's kind of helpful if you just need to shift it a little bit, maybe take some, if your lighting's blue, you need to shift it warmer to get the look to come out right. That could be useful. Contrast, let's see what that does. It's boosting the contrast in our asset. And then we have desaturation. Let's reset contrast, even though I turned it off. Let's just reset. So you can see how my I'm saturating it by going in the opposite direction. You can't push this one too far. And then if I bring it down, you can see it's like messing with the saturation. So for this one, what you might want to do is put in a max and min values to prevent the artist from pushing this too far. So we could do like -2. Default value is 1, so 0 is not the middle point. So maybe like -3, or no, +3. I still think that's going to be too high. Oops, that's the brightness actually. So let's undo that. What's in the brightness? The order is messing me up. Because it's not in the same order as it is in my node graph. Here we go. Okay, now it's finally doing it. So you can see here, I can't go past 2, can't go past -2. I can enter in values if I want to push it, but typically for desaturation, you don't want to push it that much anyway. So I'm not going to do that for my other parameters, but you can go in and set like min maxes to all these if you don't want them to be pushed to the extreme. So that is really all I want to show for base color. Let's reset those settings. I think the next thing I want to look at is ambient occlusion. So for the ambient occlusion, what you might be accustomed to is taking the AO from your red channel, popping it into the ambient occlusion slot. It really doesn't do anything when you do that. And actually a lot of times, my friend Aaron was telling me this. A lot of times in the games industry, what you can do is you can pull, or what they'll do, this is just a cool little tip, they'll pull the blue channel from the normal map and use that for their ambient occlusion if they needed to drive anything. And you can play with the contrast using some of the things that we looked at, right? And like boost it to play with the fall off and whatnot. And you can use that for your AO map. So I thought that was a cool tip that my friend Aaron showed me. Because it's like that leaves you up, and you could put like some cool map in here, like an ID map or something, a grayscale ID map. So that's kind of something I just wanted to point out. But in order to use this, what I want to do is actually use our ambient occlusion. In addition, in basically in Photoshop, if you think about it, you take your ambient occlusion pass and you would multiply it on top. So I'm essentially going to do the same thing with my ambient occlusion in my base color. But I'm also going to take it a step further, and I want to play with the contrast of that ambient occlusion, and I want to play with the color of the ambient occlusion in the occluded areas. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Oops, this guy in here. So let's start with like kind of step by step. You're going to take your AO, which is your red channel. You can pull it from here, or since we're down here, we can pull it from here, right? Because that's the ambient occlusion. So I'll pull it from here. Let's just grab a multiply. So we have our, let's put in B. It doesn't matter for multiply, right? You can 2 times 2, or 2 times 3 and 3 times 2 is the same thing. So it doesn't really matter the order. But just for like node clarity, let's put it on the bottom. So we're multiplying the texture sample, or the AO, by our diffuse. So another cool trick that we can do in without having to like plug everything in, we can start seeing what stuff looks like at these node intersections. So if I right click this multiply, hit start preview node, this is what I'm seeing. So I'm seeing the diffuse coming in, and I should be seeing the ambient occlusion multiplied on top. And if I break this node with Alt, and just watch like right here, I plug this in, my ambient occlusion, you can see what it's doing. So that's a handy feature using the preview, and this is how you stop it. and you just go back to your end result of your material. So I'll use that a lot to judge things, to make sure stuff's coming out right, and I won't always rely on the end result. That's a handy tip. So back to the ambient occlusion, that's working. I can go ahead and plug this in. So simplest thing to do is that method, I think. But like I said, I want to adjust the fall off, so I'm going to need to play with the contrast of that ambient occlusion map, and I want to adjust the color, so I'm going to need a vector 3 node. Let's go ahead and get let's get a power node to adjust the contrast. Let's get a scalar parameter. So hold S, click. We'll call this one AO strength. If I can spell. Plug this into the plug it into the exponent. There we go. And we want to plug in our ambient occlusion to that, and plug in our power to that. So what this should be doing and we can preview here because sometimes it's easier to see than with all the material channels on. So let's start preview. So yeah, I can already tell it's working because a power of 0, you're essentially using a power of 0, so that's going to be multiplying whatever by 0 x number of times. So it's gone. And if we crank this up to 1, back, if we crank this up to 6, you can see how it's playing with the fall off. So that is working perfectly. So I think for this one, it's like you could set it to 0, so it's just off. But I always like having a little bit of AO. So maybe we try 0.5 for the default. Or no, you can't use values less than 1. We'll just do 1. So we have our ambient occlusion strength, and the next thing we need is color. So this is going to be kind of weird. Let me get a color node. Excuse me, vector. Or we can hold V, right? It's the easiest way. We'll call this one AO color. And we're still previewing right here, so that's good. This is the tricky part, right? So if we just, it's like, what node do we use? We use a multiply, plug our power into that, plug our color vector in there, and B. It's like multiplying the whole thing, and I just want this to be on top of those dark areas where the ambient occlusion's coming through. So if I preview here, the black areas, the darker values, where it's white, I don't want that color shift to happen. Where it's black, I do. So let's go back and preview here. And what node we're going to use. We do have like all these blend nodes. So one of those might work. But what's really going to work well, I think, is called a linear interpolation node, or LIRP. And I believe we can hold L and click, and that gives us our LIRP node. So the cool thing with that is we have an alpha. So we're not going to multiply our ambient occlusion, that white grayscale map, with our color. What we're going to do is use our ambient occlusion as a mask to show where this color is going to show up. So let's hold Alt to delete that. We don't need the multiply node, so I'll delete that. We have our LIRP. Let's plug our color into A. we plugged our ambient occlusion, which is a grayscale mask. So if we preview it again, so that's going to be our alpha. When we change the power, our alpha changes. So set this back to 1 for now. Plug that linear interpolation into B, lerp for short. And let's start the preview node. So now you can see we're only getting that color in the ambient occlusion. Okay, so set this to default. Just do black value, no saturation. Okay. Let's go ahead and comment these to AO. And shrink this. And yeah, I think we're good. So one last thing before we move on. AO strength, let's put it in an ambient occlusion group. Same with the color. Save. Let's check it out in our material. Okay, so we have AO. So strength. You can see if you go negative, that power node is like doing something weird. So we could use like a clamp node to stop it from going. Actually, I think that's good to maybe show. I think we can add a clamp node here. Or probably a quicker way is just in our AO strength, shader min should be 0. We can max this out at like, I don't know, maybe not even that high, 20. Save. Let's restart that. And it doesn't let you go below 0. Okay, so that's a pretty intense AO, but now we get some AO. You can play with the color of it. Cool beans. Let's reset these. So we got our default. So we got AO, base color, emissive, normal, roughness, and our roughness 3-point. The next thing I think I want to do is something bigger. I want to change the color of this kind of casing, I guess, of the gun. And that requires masks, right? Because we saw in our master material with that tint, this base color, all these nodes are affecting the gun as a whole. Let's turn off this preview. So what we want to do is isolate that. And we can do that by using masks. So what I have here is a ID map. I'll drag this into my network. And I generated this in Substance Painter using like material ID bake or a object ID bake. Either way, you just want this kind of clown path, right? You can get a straight grayscale material and that will work. You could get a packed map that has 3 or 4 different grayscale materials, one in the red, green, blue, and alpha channel. Either way, we just need to get a map to isolate the part. This is a little bit more tricky because with a grayscale, you can just rip that out of the channel and plug it straight into the mask. But with color, it might be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to show you how to use the color. So I'm going to make another vector 3. So we can make utilize color. I'm going to call this one color mask. And I am going to grab a distance node. And spell distance. right here under utility, the distance there. And I'm going to multiply that. So basically what this is going to do is once I select the color from my ID map, we can use the distance node to help like isolate that color that we select. So real quick, let's take a look at this map. Ooh. Stop previewing. Can I preview? There we go. So you can see here, I want to grab this orangish red color. I think if we set it to S linear. Oops, let's not mess with that. It's like, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be true red, so there's some color correction going on, or not happening that should be. But that's okay. So they're all different colors. That's like the biggest part. So in this color mask, let me go ahead and sample that red. And in our distance field, let's see what it's looking like now. Okay. So you see how now the other colors, so it's picking up some of that color information, but we can fix that. But for the most part, that red is this black, and then everything else is white or very close to white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use CheapContrast, and this can just be a, we can use a parameter. I think we could just use a straight constant though. Oops. 1. And I'll try to find, because I don't think we need to have access to this in the shader. So let's preview here now. Start preview. Yeah, so we're getting that those lighter grays are skewing them toward white. So this is what we want. We've isolated the part that we want to start changing color. So depending on like where you're plugging this in as well, you might want to use -1 node, and we can see what this looks like to like get the part you want to be white and the stuff you don't want to be black. So that's how you can invert, is using the minus node. But I think for what I'm about to do, it's okay if the part I want is black. But I'll keep that minus node there just in case I need it. So now what we want to do is use this mask as an alpha in our lerp node. So let's go ahead, hold L, right click, left click, excuse me, create a lerp node, and this is going to be our alpha. So I'm going to turn off my preview network, stop that, and we want to use a color. So we'll do hold V. We'll call this new color, I guess. Plug it in A, plug it in B. So let's preview this lerp node. So you can see what it's doing is it's working. The mask is saying, hey, where it was black, fill it in with this color. So if I change the color to make it a little bit more obvious, it's not just the mask, that's working well. I mean, that looks nice, but it's overriding a lot of material that we want. So what we need to do is blend our base color with this new color before we plug it in A. So let's drag out this. Let's bring up a multiply. Let's plug our color into here. So when I plug this into A now, we're getting that information. It's just not flooding it with that pink. So like I mentioned earlier, there's all these blend functions that we can use. So I think The hard light might work well in my instance. So instead of going through multiply, we'll send these through hard light before plugging it into A. And that looks pretty good. All right. Almost done, not quite. You might be thinking, well, now we can just pop this lerp into our base color. But remember, our ambient occlusion, we pass our base color into there. So we need to put the lerp through here. So let's actually pass this in first. So the lerp will come after this multiply. Let's make a new multiply. And this will pass. So this is our base color, basically after the ambient occlusion gets applied. So let's plug this into B. And then we need to pass or multiply our ambient occlusion into that section that's getting the color treatment. And now this can pass into A. And so what we can do is hopefully play with the intensity. Yep, they're both getting the ambient occlusion multiplied on top. Perfect. Let's be a little bit organized. We'll select these. Hard. There we go. Comment. We'll call this one mask. Just bringing stuff closer together, not as spread out. Let's call this one like just call it main color. So that's good. So now we got that. Lastly, I think I want to do something with the metal in this just to show off. I don't think we'll do anything too new though. Oop, before we bop into metalness, let's actually make sure these are set up. So what I'll do is make a new group. So let's go back to our mask. Call it color, main color change. We can set it to, oh, I forgot our values already. I think we've used one before. Set it to 1. Default value, white. It should not. Oh, not the mask. Excuse me. That's my bad. This one will switch to. I think it needs to be actually middle gray. So let's do value of 0.5. Yes, that's what this one needs to be default. The new color multiplied on top, or hard light on top, blending mode. Let's go back to the mask. Keep that color. Color mask, main color change. Sort priority 1. Let's put this in the main color change. And let's set the priority to 2. Save. Check how it's looking in the material instance. Uh-oh. sure everything's plugged in. I did not plug in the lerp into the base color. And stop previewing. Okay. Save. Main color change. So let's see what this is doing. If I play with the mask, or well, you won't notice anything now, because the new color isn't set. We'll set it to like green. And if I play with the mask color, you can see it's picking up the different areas that are masked. So because we have that contrast on there, it's not going to work 100%. So what we could do is we could expose that this value. We could call it mask contrast. Expose it as a parameter, and then allow the user to tweak that, which might not be a bad idea. Right click, convert to parameter. We could call it, let's put it in the color change group. We could call it 3. And we could say mask contrast. So yeah. Save it. All right. Now let's go ahead and look at what we can do for the metal. I don't really want to do anything too crazy for the metal, because if you're doing that kind of a change, something from a metal to a non, you probably want to do that like in Substance Painter or Quixel Mixer. But just to show like what we can do, I think it's kind of fun. So what I'm going to do is break this, and I'm going to put this through a 3-point levels. Then we'll do a lerp. Basically, I just want to like use the mask one more time to show like that, hey, you could like be pretty versatile with this mask. I don't think we need the minus, the inverted mask. I think it's gonna work just fine with this one. So we want this to be in B, I think. No, excuse me, this is the mask. We want it to be in the alpha. So what we're going to do is similar here. We're going to be able to change the metalness for this portion of our gun where it's masked. So we want these same nodes. Excuse me. S click, and S click. This will be white. This will be mid. And this will be black. So default, we want to keep 0.5 for the mid, 0 for black, and 1 for white. Make sure they're plugged into their corresponding channels in the node. Okay. So we have our metal coming in, and we need our metal. We can actually do this. So let me preview here. Okay, so let's say I change this to -1. You can see it's only affecting the metal change for that part, which is probably what we'll end up doing if we want to make that like paint, for example. The issue here is like that's very unsophisticated because like, well, I guess we tweak these values, right? So yeah, so we have some wiggle room. Again, if you're doing like a really crazy change like this, you probably want to just do it in the material. in Substance Painter or whatever. Okay, so that's what that lerp is. So now we'll plug this into our metal pass, and we'll stop the preview. That looks the same. I can call this metalness. Metal for main color change. Put these parameters in a group. We'll call it metal contrast. Even though it's not going to be the whole object, it's just for the part that changes. So let's put that in here. You want to make sure it makes sense to like somebody who's using your material. But if you're the only one using it, you just gotta make it so it makes sense to you. Alright, save. And I believe this is what we want from our material. So you can see, yeah, it looks really complex. It is more complex than what we had in the very beginning, but it's not the craziest thing in the world. Let's reset these. Metal contrast. Oops, where is that white one? I put in main color change. We want it in metal contrast. Okay, expose these. So now, when we go ahead and actually change the color, okay, we're like, oh, well, maybe this is paint on top or something. So what do we do? -1. So now that's looking more like how we want it to. So yeah, I just wanted to show you one more, like, you use the mask, but you'll probably propagate using that mask throughout. Let's go ahead and restart this. Restart this one. So this is what it should look like default. It should look like the same as that first really basic material we used. You want to make sure all those default values will get you to that basic, and then you can tweak them from there. So the very, very last thing I think I'm going to do in here is actually set stuff up so I can plug different maps in. So we have this master material. We made a material instance. So if we want to, like, yeah, this material instance is good for using it on different versions of this pistol, right? But let's say we want to put it on an assault rifle. Well, that's going to have different UVs, different maps. So we need to be able to swap those in and out in the material instance. So all we need to do is go through where our maps are, right click, convert to parameter. We'll call this one base color. Right click, convert to parameter. We can call this one our occlusion, roughness, and ambient occlusion. Or excuse me, occlusion, roughness, metalness. I usually say MOR or MRO, but as long as we all know what we're talking about. We'll call this one right click, convert to parameter. This will be our ID map. And our last two, we have our convert to parameter emissive. And we have our normal. Let's go ahead and do another thing in here because we want to be organized. We'll call this one maps. We'll put this in spot 0. I want this one to be at the top or the bottom. I'm just going through all the maps and making sure they're organized in that same group. Save. Boom. Looks like those are higher up. That's okay. That's a good spot for them, I guess. So yeah. So now we can plug in our maps in our material instances. So let's see the real power of using material instance, right? Not only is a way to make these adjustments and not like mess up our blueprint where we have our blueprint, it's safe. But you can come into here and make this smaller. Oh, I think I showed this already, but just a reminder, like we can now play and see these changes update in our scene. So this is like really good for like lighting, right? You have your beauty shot, your lighting is good here. So now you can make these adjustments in here. I can change the color. I can go into some of those other things like roughness and tweak the contrast a little bit. So you might not be able to tell on YouTube, but even if I just play with the cheap contrast, I'm just boosting some variation in there. Maybe it's too contrasty, so you flatten it down. You could play with that. So yeah. Let's do... I think that's all good. So yeah, so that's one reason why we like to use material instance. Another one is if we go into our content browser, I'm going to right click, I'm going to create another material instance. I'm going to call this one matte main instance. Let's do M8 Avenger. Okay, so this is also, if I open it, it's another material instance. And so I can have two instances of that material with different settings, right? So that's awesome. But because I added these maps to it, it's even more powerful. If I unhide this, hide predator, I have a completely different asset, right? Well, that instance I just made, I can assign it to that. I can navigate to those maps from my content browser and just plug them in my material instance. So our base color, our normal, our emissive, our ID, and our packed map. Okay, and it's on there. So in here, I'd have to change the view, right? So select the asset, boom, there, and you can see it in here. And just like that, I now have access to all those parameters I made in my blueprint. Let's do emissive, bring it around where we started. All those parameters can be adjusted. So the color map is the main thing that's going to need some work. Because if we change the new color, you see how it's not changing like those gray metal parts or whatever. So what we need to do is in our ID map, identify where those parts are. I think it's going to be this green. Click here, click the eyedrop, boom, and we got it. Okay, and that's awesome. I really think that's so cool that you can do that with a pretty basic material setup with blueprints. So if we navigate to our finish one, you can kind of see how I use it. So this is the one I made for this. I essentially, well, I don't have the master material that's this defaulted, except for the one that I was working on. So let's bring that up. I can reset everything. So I went from this to like this. You can see it's on the Predator, but that's okay. You can see all the subtle adjustments I made to this. I just went through that. If we take a look at the Predator, this is kind of what I used for that. And that looks, I really like what it's doing, like in the roughness area and stuff here. So if I put this back on, this is before, and this is with my material and making some adjustments, right? So what I would do is I'd probably go to my post-processing volume, dial the flare in because it's out of control because I cranked up the brightness. But yeah, that's it. This was a long tutorial. Thanks for sticking with me, though. I really hope you guys found something useful and it's inspired you to kind of create cool things that you can mess around with your materials. It's also good to mention, like, I used to work at with making car configurators in real-time engines, and so like that's something we would do a lot of times is like this material swapping or just doing like color adjustments. So you can really give access to your user or your player to make these adjustments and really customize their objects and stuff. And I think it's just going to like be a pretty easy way to kind of boost like user satisfaction, right? I always like customizing things in my games, so it's just super cool that I know how to do it like behind the scenes. But yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Have a wonderful day.